Welcome to Uniquely Qualified. I'm your friend and host, Liz Ficken, and I'm so glad you're here. Uniquely Qualified is a podcast that empowers guests to share their experience, strength, and hope in overcoming challenges in the spirit of mutual healing. We hope that you'll leave feeling more aware, connected, and supported in navigating the human experience. This episode is part 2 with John. So if you haven't listened to part 1 of John is Uniquely Qualified, please go back and listen to that episode before you go any further here. But then please come back because you'll definitely want to hear the rest of John's story. In part 1, we learned that John is originally from San Jose and that he has lived in Graham, Washington for most of his adult life. He has 4 adult daughters, 2 adult sons, 5 grandchildren, and another on the way. And when the newest addition is born, he will have 4 granddaughters and 2 grandsons. John currently works as a clinical social worker in the physical and medicine rehabilitation unit at the hospital where he has worked for the last 17 years. Before this, John was a social worker for the Department of Child and Protective Services. Last week in his intro, we also talked about how John has earned his associate's degree, his bachelor's degree, and his master's degree. And we're going to get into that in more detail today. And before we get too much further into part 2, I do want to let our listeners in on some behind the scenes work here at Uniquely Qualified. Many of our guests have a personal relationship with me before coming on the show and recording, but actually a majority of our guests are connections with other show guests. And so this episode is really special because John and I are connected thanks to Jessie. Listeners will probably remember Jessie's episode. It aired on December 3rd, 2024, and she talked about being a mama to a child with hearing impairment. Jessie became my friend thanks to Shannon, who I went to grad school with. Shannon's episode discussed her 2 miscarriages, and hers was one of the 2 episodes that launched the day this podcast first aired on November 5th, 2024. So I just want to pause and thank Shannon and Jessie for being on the show and enabling me to meet John, because without Shannon, we don't have Jessie, and without Jessie, we don't have John. And I also, before I get back to John's story, I asked for a quote from Jessie, who is co-workers with John. And this is what she said. John has some of the best work ethic I have ever seen. He works so hard to make sure his patients are taken care of, sometimes too hard, I think. John is such a special addition to our team because he is a living testament that there is life after injury. None of our therapists or doctors can really explain that truth to patients because they haven't lived it. I admire John so much for so many reasons, and I am grateful to call him my friend. So I just wanted to share that. Thank you, Jessie, for connecting us with John so that we could have this wonderful story. And just to bring us back to what we were discussing at the end of part 1, we were talking about John's spinal injury rehabilitation and his early days of his injury, which also happened to be early days of becoming a parent for the first time. So John, why don't we start there with some of that early parenthood stuff? I know some of that included nightmares, insomnia. I'll hand it over to you.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you for having me again. And thank you for Jessie for being such a good liar. Appreciate that. I'll have to thank her in person when I see her. So early on, when I got discharged from the hospital and I was home, I really couldn't sleep. I would go 3 or 4 nights, either with no sleep, an hour sleep, 2 hours sleep, maybe an hour, then wake up for 3 hours, and maybe another half hour, just all over the place. Some nights I wouldn't sleep at all. And then like on that 4th or 5th night, I was so tired, I finally would get a whole night's sleep. And so that pattern literally went on for 6 months. And my take on it was my body probably getting used to the fact that I wasn't exerting any energy. I wasn't moving. And again, I had talked to a lot of doctors, spinal cord injured friends, things like that. And everybody had a different story. Everybody saw, I sleep no problem. Oh yeah, I can sleep like that. Oh yeah, I don't get any sleep either. Same thing. And the doctors really couldn't explain why. But so I kind of self-diagnosed that as, just again, for being so physical and manual labor my whole life. I was just not used to not doing nothing. Matter of fact, again, it's one of the reasons my wife married, because married me because she saw how hard I worked at the car wash, and she said, "Why are you working so hard? It's just a car. It's just." I'm like, "It's our job." I'm like,
Yeah.
it's the right thing to do. Plus, I make a lot of tips if I'm working hard." And she said she tells people this story a lot that I was living with two other guys in an apartment, the bachelor pad. But this is after I had kind of straightened up my life or started to. And she came over unannounced one day, and I was in the bathroom on my hands and knees scrubbing behind the toilet. And she was like, "What are you doing?" I said, "Cleaning." She's like, "Why are you doing that?" I said, "Because it's disgusting." She told herself at that time, she said, "I knew if there was something that needed to be done or I didn't want to do it, John would just do it.
Yeah.
There'd be no argument, there wouldn't be anything. He would just do it." And then I
Hmm.
broke my neck, and so she was like, "Crap, not only can he not do any of those, I gotta change all the diapers."
Mm.
That thing. So I don't know if I said that earlier, but men complain about changing the diaper, getting up a baby, whatever. I said I would love to do any of those
Yeah.
things. So
Hmm.
once I started to, I slept, started sleeping again, whatever. I would have nightmares
Mm.
frequently. Um, and most of those were about my daughter, Tink. So we call her Tink. So she's 30 years old now. So again, she was born right after I got hurt. So we've aged together.
Yeah.
But I would have nightmares about something happening to her and me not being able to save her, help her. And it was just terrifying. And
Hmm.
so, and she was an only child for 5 years. And so she lived this with me. And like I said, she was a huge, blessing, obviously, of me getting through this. So hopefully everyone has someone like that in their life,
Hmm.
whether it be a parent, brother, sister, friend, dog,
Yeah.
whatever. But she was that for me. But again, I had these nightmares. She's falling in the pool, running in the street, whatever it is, and I couldn't save her. They got less frequent as the years went by, and they finally stopped, I would say, within 5, 10 years ago. And
Mm.
it didn't even hit me, but one day I was like, holy crap. It's like I haven't had a nightmare about Tank in a long time. And I was like,
Mm.
oh my gosh, what a relief. I said,
Yeah.
or maybe it's I'm not sleeping again. I don't know which, but no.
Oh man.
Yeah. So the other issue with that is I became a big helicopter parent. Yeah, I just and it helped. It didn't help me, but it helped her and the rest of my kids down the road. That my wife was the total opposite.
Oh.
She was like people said, "Oh, she's like the man in the relationship because she's just like letting the kids jump off cliffs, ride, do everything." And I'm like, "No, don't do that. You're gonna get hurt." Yeah, everything. So she really balanced it out.
Hmm.
With the kids. So that was good. So
Hmm.
anyway,
Well, I'm
where are we going from here again
Well,
from
I'm glad. Yeah, I'm glad that the nightmares have subsided because one of the things that we were talking about in between recording episodes was how somebody who I myself have experienced insomnia at different parts in my life, or when I have nightmares, what do? I get up out of bed and move around. How I just imagine that would be additionally scary to have to stay in your space and not be able to, like, it's like the nightmare stays with you. And so I guess I was just going to ask you if you had any ways of, like, how did you like take care of yourself mentally when you would wake up in the night from a nightmare? Would you ever be able to fall back to sleep after that, or was it just wait until you could get some help getting out of bed?
kind of sometimes both.
Yeah.
I think, and even now, I told you in the break that, I still go through nights without sleeping.
Right.
I'm not necessarily having dreams or nightmares that wake me up. I just don't sleep. And yeah,
Yeah.
I can't get up. Sometimes I think that "Well, if I could get up, I'd watch some TV or do something, but I can't. And it's not worth it trying to have somebody. It's too much work. Like if I was having to wake up my wife and say, hey, can you get up and get me up? She'd be like, what, are you
Yeah.
crazy?
Right.
He's like, no, I'm going to another room.
Yeah.
And I'm such a light sleeper, it's horrible. So I
Mm,
have a fan on overhead and a fan on my desk to kind of drown out noises and just that, they have all those apps now and things you can listen, meditation and things you can listen to that, some people use and it's helpful, but no,
yeah.
I'll just sit there and think about everything running through my head. So my
Yeah.
everything in my life. Sometimes I can fall back to sleep, sometimes I can't. So it just depends. And I'm like I said, I'm such a light sleeper. Any
Yeah.
weird noise will wake me up, but the fans help drown it out. So
Yeah, I like having some white noise in my sleep environment too. Yeah. Some of the other stuff that we wanted to touch on again before getting further into your story was the two worries that never go away, caregivers and transportation. I'd love if you could share a little bit more about those two worries.
yeah, so I tell people the one thing that never goes away if you're in my condition
Mm-hmm.
or or if you had a stroke, and it could be anything that you either need somebody around all the time or you need help with your activities of daily living, like getting up,
Yeah.
showered, dressed, all those things,
Mm-hmm.
which I need. So for me, they never go away. And anytime one of my caregivers says, I'm gonna quit or I found a new job or whatever, this immediate stress hits. So,
Yeah.
um, and then you have caregivers that are always late or don't show up. And so you can't depend on them.
Mm.
And I've had caregivers over the years that, they just don't show up. They don't call, nothing. You're like, well, what the heck? And then they
Oof.
have some lame excuse. So, but my wife was always here to get me up if they didn't show up. So she could get me up. But that was never good because my caregivers that are paid do it the way I ask them to and the way I want things
Mm.
done. She doesn't care. She's gonna do what she wants to do to an extent. I mean, she'll, but she doesn't do it every day, so I'll have to gently remind her, oh, can you move me that way, do this or that? So it was never just like having your caregivers who just, once you have them, and they're here 2, 3, 4 weeks. It's like clockwork in the morning. We can go 45 minutes without saying a word and
Mm.
just go through a routine, which I tell people, I said, I talk all day for a living. Last thing I want to do is talk in the shower or anything
Yeah.
else. And I actually did have one caregiver who must have thought I was her personal therapist because
Oh boy.
she had more problems than, and she just wanted to spill her guts to me in the shower every day. So I finally had to tell her, but anyway, so yeah, the caregiver thing, one quit. So I think I mentioned the two LPN nurses that came home with
Yeah.
me. They both worked for me for like 2 years. And then, it just got too much for them doing both jobs. And so that was the first time it's like, oh no, I got to find another caregiver. And back then, there was no social media, no computer. I mean, the computers were just kind of coming in, the internet, all that. I had the You Got Mail, AOL, all that good stuff. So we would put an ad in the newspaper under jobs offered, employment. They had a section with all those for those of you that are old enough to remember that, or word of mouth, letting all your family and friends know, hey, I need a caregiver. The state will pay them this much. They just gotta, do some classes, background check, whatever. So anyway, and you have to interview them. So I always kind of tell people, I said, I interview them over the phone. I can screen a lot of them out that way. And then if they pass that, I'll have them come over for an in-person visit. And people do this different ways. They teach you not to have anyone come to your house, meet in a public place like that. I'm like, nowadays people probably would look like Uber driver comes all the time. So does everybody else. So it's
Hmm.
not that big of a deal, but it could be. But I've never had that kind of problem. But the problem I have had is sometimes they just don't show up. They don't call. And for what and my wife would be like, what did you tell them on the phone? Oh, that's the thing. They wouldn't even show up for the in-person interview. They didn't.
Oh,
And so I got to a point where when I was talking to them, I said, if you can't show up, if you have to change the time, please just call and let me know.
yeah,
I won't be offended. But I set time aside for your interview. So if you're not gonna be
yeah,
able to make it, I could arrange someone else to come in that time.
right.
And they just don't show up. And you call them, and sometimes they'll answer. They'll say, "Oh yeah, I'm sorry. I talked to my husband. He doesn't think it's a good idea. Whatever it may be." Um,
Mm-hmm.
they'd have some excuse, and some you just never hear from. And my wife's
Hmm.
like, "What do you say on the phone? Make sure you tell them you're married. Make sure you tell them I'll be here for the interview. And if they want to meet somewhere else, I'm like, I do. I say all these things." And it was just the craziest thing for so long. And then you finally get used to it, right? Uh,
Hmm.
but I've been pretty fortunate that I've had caregivers that have worked for me for like 6 or 7 years at a time,
It's
which is
great.
again unheard of. Now, personally, I think I'm easy to work with and get along with, and I've had a couple of my caregivers that have went to work for a few other quadriplegics that I know, and I
Hmm.
was right. And I was right. And I would tell them, "See, I'm not looking so bad after all, am I?
Ah.
You thought I was picky about how my shirt was tucked in." So yeah, but so especially when you lose a good one that's been with you for years, you're like, "Oh my gosh, how am I going to replace her?" But
Yeah,
it's always worked out eventually, but finding them and keeping them is just a word. It's never goes away. It's one of the just like my paralysis is never going away. Neither
yeah.
is the caregiving issue because I always need them. And my wife joked
Hmm.
one time said, and I wish I would have this one caregiver. She actually worked for me for a couple of years, but she missed so much work, and sometimes she'd call, sometimes she wouldn't. She had every excuse that you could ever possible think of in your life.
Oh my
And we would just laugh. We were like, this can't be true. It can't be the case. And she was dead honest. And, I'm like, either she's a damn good liar, damn good actress, or yeah, because I believed her. I'm like,
Wow.
how can you not believe that? So that's just a huge problem. And if you have a significant other, or whatever, and people always say this, I want them to be my partner, not my caregiver, right?
Right.
And it's smart. I agree with that. But they're gonna be there helping you do a lot of stuff anyway. So if you can take the heavy lifting away from them, that's definitely gonna help. So
Hmm.
yeah, so that's one
When
piece.
not to interrupt you, because I feel like this could be a whole nother is
Yeah,
about caregiving, but I
yeah.
know that in other parts of the world, I'm thinking specifically Western Europe, the kind of work that your wife was doing to support you is paid. And I feel
Mhm.
like I definitely hear what you're saying in terms of you want your partner and your caregiver to not necessarily be the same, but just acknowledging that, unless there's something in the state of Washington that I'm not aware of, like your domestic partner, your spouse doesn't get paid for that kind of work versus a caregiver does. And I just wanted to mention that because I know there's a growing movement in the United States. I've specifically seen it with parents that have pretty significantly physically and mentally disabled children where they're like,
Mhm.
I, my full-time job is caring for this child. I should get
Yeah.
paid for it. I guess I just wanted to acknowledge, systemically speaking, that just because you're reliant on people that are getting paid to come and help you out, other parts of the world handle it differently, and I don't know. I'm a fan of how it's done other places. It seems a little more compassionate and people getting paid for work that they're not getting paid for here. Does that
Yeah.
make sense? What I'm saying?
No, no, yeah, you're correct, and I can speak to that too. I mean, you're right. In the state of Washington, your spouse cannot be a paid caregiver. There,
Yeah,
for better or for worse, you signed up for it. Too bad.
yeah,
But,
yeah,
if you're not legally married, you know, boyfriend, girlfriend, girl, whatever
yeah.
partner situation, if it's not a legal marriage, then you can get paid for it. So. Yeah. So you're right.
Interesting stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the child, mother, parent, child thing is different. You can get paid after the child turns 18, I believe. You can get some
Oh, okay.
you can get some respite care through the state to pay, other caregivers. Other than that, it's like that's your kid.
Yeah.
You have to take care of your child.
Yeah. Yeah, that's thank you for pointing out that piece about after they're 18. What I'm specifically thinking of is these advocacy groups of moms, and I'm sure there's dads involved too, where they have these little tiny people that it's like this is full time for me, and like the law says, well, you gave birth to them, they're your responsibility when it's
Yeah.
um just a lot for somebody
Yeah.
who also might not be like medically trained for how to take care of a child. And I know, again,
Yeah.
completely separate from your situation, but I do think that conversation about paid work for people giving care to people who need that assistance is just like something that's a topic for discussion right now.
Yeah. And there you're right. So the other thing is, we have a lot of young adults
Mm-hmm.
that have, medical issues, injuries, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
that still live at their parents' house, don't have
Yeah.
don't have a partner, and mom
Mm-hmm.
and dad are the caregivers. So,
Yeah.
but they mom and dad can get paid through the state too, but it really is so overwhelming and so much that
Yeah.
having, many hands make light work, right?
That's right.
So
Yeah.
the more people you can rely on and trust to help, uh,
Absolutely.
it's gonna be beneficial. I tell folks, patients and their families a lot. I said, when you first have this kind of injury, everybody and their brother calls you and says, if you need anything, call me. If I can help in any way, call me, this, that, or the other. And I always
Mm-hmm.
let them know, call them,
Yeah.
because in 6 months or a year, they won't be calling. So
Yeah.
when they call, you can put them on the spot right away and say, yes, a matter of fact, can you come sit with John from 12 to 4 on Saturday afternoon? I mean,
Yeah.
it could be as simple as that. Um,
Yeah.
I always say, the other thing here is I don't want to be a burden on,
Mm.
whoever. And I go back to just myself,
Mm-hmm.
whether I'm in a wheelchair or walking or whatever, I'm like, I always feel good when I can help somebody.
Absolutely.
I love helping people. So
Mm-hmm.
that makes me feel good. And so
Yeah.
I said, think of it as you are just helping them feel good about themselves. I said,
That is so true.
let them help you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
That is, I feel like that's such an important lesson to learn too, is when you are willing to receive help from other people, you are helping somebody feel like they're doing something good.
yeah,
And it's good for everybody.
yeah. So the other piece, transportation, real quick. So,
Transportation. Yeah.
so, some people can get in and out of a regular car and they can have anybody drive them around. A lot of people
Mm-hmm.
in power wheelchairs, you can't fit the chair, or you have to buy a van with a ramp and a conversion that they can fit in, which costs twice as much as a regular vehicle. And disabled people have all kinds of money, so they should be able to afford that, right? Not to
Mm.
mention everything else, but yeah. So that's kind of a big deal. There
Yeah.
are a lot of rural communities out here where I live, and I'm actually in one of them. And I knew that when I moved out to this area. I was 2.6 miles away from the pickup boundary. So
Oh.
the shuttles would only go, if you were on a bus line, they would
Mm-hmm.
only pick you up 2.5 miles past that bus line, right?
Mm.
So they wouldn't come to my house, but they would come to the gas station a mile down the road from my house.
Uh-huh.
So a lot of times I would trot in my wheelchair all the way down to the gas station, rain, snow, sleet, whatever, and there's no sidewalks, curvy roads. And so I got real good at dodging traffic and
Oh,
swerving and getting out of the way and whatnot. But and if you have somebody with some developmental disabilities, they can't do that.
no.
I mean, it's dangerous for me, but a lot dangerous for other people. There were times when my daughter was, 3, 4, 5 years old, and she would sit on my lap. This is after I got real brave and comfortable and used to being a quadriplegic. Why we would trot 2.5 miles down to the bus stop, go on the bus and go places together. So my wife would be at work or somewhere else, and I'm like, we're gonna take a little trip.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, silly question, but what for your power chair, how far or how long can you go before I imagine it needs to
Yeah.
get charged
Yeah.
or how is it powered?
Yeah, I charge it every night, no matter what. But
Uh-huh.
uh, what they tell you, it can go a full charge can go about 20 miles, and that's
Great.
on a fresh set of batteries. So as
Okay.
the batteries get old, the less you'll be able to go too. But most people
Mm,
don't. Most people don't come close to that. Not even me. I might lose half my charge, depending on my workday and how often. I probably put 5 miles a day on this thing. Who knows? I wish
yeah.
I wish I had an odometer because then I could tell. But yeah. So anyway, so that's just, and again, that never goes away. Even it's quick funny story for you. When my mom, my sister were here,
Uh-huh.
and I was in a manual chair. Well, they had to put the chair in the trunk of my wife's car, right? So I get home, they drive me home from somewhere one day. And again, we couldn't take the power chair, so we had to take the manual chair. But they could transfer me in and out of the car, which wasn't super easy, but for some, I wouldn't even dare try it now, but we did it back then. And then I can't, was it my wife? Or my little sister. It seems like they both had a moment. I think it must have been my wife. My little sister wouldn't have thrown the wheelchair all over the yard. She couldn't get the trunk shut, and she got so mad and so frustrated. And I'm sitting in the car, and all of a sudden I see one of my footrests go flying by
Oh.
over into the front yard, and then
Oh my gosh.
another part went flying, and I'm just sitting there like trying not to say a word. Like, what are you doing? I was just
Yeah.
like, that was when you better just keep your mouth shut.
Yeah.
So I tell everybody now when they leave the hospital, I said, you're gonna get arguments, you're gonna throw things, you're gonna
Yeah.
use a lot of curse words.
Yeah.
So, so anyway, yeah, there you go.
So that's it. That is really interesting. You also mentioned that you have an adaptive van,
Yeah,
and I'd love to also just learn a little bit more about that, how you
yeah.
got it. What some listeners might not know what an adaptive van is, so if you wouldn't just mind
Mhm.
explaining.
Yeah, no problem. So, kind of the most common thing people hear are uh, maybe driving hand controls on cars, and
Hmm.
paraplegics get in and out of the car, they can use those, no problem.
Hmm.
Simple adaptation. You can put them on just about any car vehicle there is, right? Mine I can't. So what I have is a conversion van, which means these vans come off the assembly line, and then there's a few conversion companies around the United States, probably around the world. I'm looked into everything, but they take the van and they cut out the whole bottom section of the van and they literally lower it like 10 inches. So
Mm.
when you get in, you don't have to put your head down. It's not scraping the ceiling or whatever. So, and then it has the automatic lift that will go up. They have some that fold up and then the door automatically shuts. They have some that the ramp comes out from underneath the van, door opens, ramp comes out from underneath, you get out. So those I needed one I can drive. So I had to get one that already had that floor conversion. But then there's 100 more modifications we have to make just for me to be able to drive it. So
Okay.
I'm set up to drive my van specifically with my level of injury, with my wheelchair, everything else. So somebody
Mhm.
else can just get in with a different wheelchair and drive it. I
Mm-hmm.
couldn't just get in with a different wheelchair and drive it. Every time you get a new chair, you got to adjust the modifications,
Mm-hmm.
which cost thousands of dollars. I mean, well, every car costs thousands, but like my first vehicle after the modifications and everything was done in 19, gosh, what was it? 1999, 2001,
Uh-huh.
was $42,000 when it was all said and done.
Oh,
My next van in 2015 was 75,000 when it was all said and done. And those
whew.
vans were both brand new. Well,
Okay.
I take that back. Used brand new. One had 2,000 miles on it. The other one had 15 miles on it. So it was
Oh,
it was 3 years old, but it sat in the showroom. Nobody had bought it, so it had no miles
mm-hmm.
on it. I remember when I got my first van, my friend that helped to come get me out of the hospital and take me over when my daughter was born. I told him about the van. I said, "Yeah, some lady brought it in. She said her husband passed away and she didn't need it anymore." And he said, "Thank God for old people." I'm like, "Oh my gosh." Right, it's true, right?
Yeah.
Someone's death was my blessing, if you want to take it that
Yeah.
way. But
Mm-hmm.
and then the one I got now costs about 93,000. So, and the only reason I was able to get the van, because I didn't have the money for that, was the state of Washington has a program that helps people with work-related modifications, whatever that may be, right? So for me, I knew it existed,
Mm-hmm.
and some people went to them for even school loans, different things like that to help pay for school stuff or whatnot. I knew the
Mm-hmm.
van was going to cost so much money that I'm like, I'm just going to go to them for that when I'm
Yeah.
ready. When I'm ready, and everybody I talked to said, "Oh, they'll never pay for the van and the conversion." So they'll pay for the conversion part, but you'll have to pay the 20 grand for the van. And I'm like, I didn't believe them. And sure enough, I was right.
Mm.
I've gotten them all paid for, but
Good.
they give them to me because I work full time and
Mm.
I need it to get to work and do the job that I have. So they see it as an investment for the state, for the country, taxpayers, whatever. So, I wind up going to work and, having a full-time job and been doing that for a long time. uh I the one thing that did surprise me with this one is, or that when I got my first van, was I didn't even have a job yet.
Mm.
I was still working on my bachelor's degree, but they knew, and it had to be more than the first counselor I worked with on it, that, oh, he's going back to work. So yeah, he's almost done with his bachelor's degree. Let's get him a van. It's going to pay off anyway. And so yeah, I was shocked they got it for him before I even had a job. So I'd never heard that happening before, but I guess they had some faith in me.
Well, I'm really glad that you were able to have that, I'm gonna say like resource and tool and support because it sounds
Mhm.
like it really helps you be that much more independent with ability to drive yourself places
Yeah.
and get to
When
work and do your
yeah,
very important job.
yeah, and before I got my first van, I actually we actually bought an old Cabulance van. It was a huge white one with a big old giant top, and it had a lift on the outside of the back door. It was almost like a, Pepsi truck or some delivery truck.
Yeah, like a lift gate
Yeah,
thing.
in taking the cabulance and shuttles for all those years, I went down every back street in all of Pierce County. I could get anywhere from anywhere. These drivers knew all the tricks. And so we drove by one house one time, had all these junk cars, and that I saw the van in there. And so my mom and dad came up visiting one time, and we went and looked at it, and the guy said, "Yeah, 3,500. It's yours. It runs." We had to do a couple things to it, but you could stand up inside it. It was so tall,
Oh,
and
good.
it had shag carpeting wall to wall.
Oh,
Yeah, like in literally like from the 70s.
Yeah.
So sometimes my wife would have to drive me to that gas station instead of having driving me all the way to school. She would just drive me around the corner to catch the shuttle, then go to
Mm,
school or wherever I had to go. And I remember we'd plop Tink in the back seat, get her pajamas on, drag her out at 6 in the morning, whatever time it was, and she got in there and went with us,
mm,
and went back home. So
mm. Well, thank you for just telling us a little bit about caregiving, how important it is to you in transportation. I was thinking now we could transition back to a point that you started talking about in part one, but that we didn't quite get all the way through, which was talking about moving from the first house that you were living in with your wife and Tink to the move. Would you mind just telling us a little bit about what made that so challenging?
yeah. So and like I mentioned earlier, you know, everything in life is challenging.
Yeah.
Whether you have an injury or not, life is hard. But this and then going through this, obviously it's hard in so many ways. But the move, so again, like I said, we were living in her aunt's house.
Mm-hmm.
And this was, you know, August I got home. So we knew we needed a bigger place. This was just not gonna be great. And then I think my wife's aunt passed away, and then the uncle passed away. So her cousins were selling both houses and the property. So we
Oh.
were like, oh, we got to move. Well, we knew we had to move anyway, right? So mind you, we got no money. I mean, I take that back. I got on Social Security, which took about 6 months to get on, but they retro it back to the day of your
Mm.
injury, which they don't do again if you have SSI. So, I was making about $1,200 a month. She was making maybe four or five, still doing, hair. So obviously not a lot. So we just started looking at houses, whatever we could look at, and we looked all over, Tacoma, everywhere. But the only places we could afford were like out here in Graham, because it's like I said, it was very rural back then. 30 years later, not so much. But so we've seen a lot of change here. So we had contacted this. Well, we had first had a realtor through our church that somebody told us about. So we were working with them, and a gentleman had a little piece of property out in Graham and a single wide mobile home on a different property. And so he was said, you can buy the mobile home, move it over on this property. And it was something we thought we could afford. So we drive out there. Me and my mom was up here still, or came back, and she was in the back seat. And we found the trailer where he was talking about. And it was, kind of in a mobile home park, but everybody owned their property and their homes or whatever. So we turn around, just kind of pull up to the stop sign on the main two intersection roads. And we're sitting there waiting for the guy, right? Waiting. We're talking, and my mom's in the back seat saying, boy, I sure like this house. I sure like this house. I really like this house. Oh, what about this house? And I'm like, Mom, what are you talking about this house for? We're waiting for the guy. And I turned around and looked, and there was a for sale sign on that house. And I'm
Mm.
like, okay, that again, to me, a whole God thing, right? I just happened to have my mom with me. That she was the only one who knows the house.
Yeah.
We just happened to park there, waiting for this other opportunity that was horrible after we looked into it. And so we called the people for this house. And, I think it was like $67,000 or something. But when you got no money or nothing to put down, that's a lot. So
Yeah.
anyway, we set up a time to go look at it, and had some friends come with me because there's like four steps to go into the place. So they lifted me up and carried me in there. Um, I'm not, and it's not light either, this wheelchair and me. So anyway, went in there, and it was just, oh my gosh, this is perfect. Had a huge living room, kitchen that I could go around and circle in, had another family room, nice backyard, 3 bedroom, 2 bath. And the master bedroom was right down the hall. I could just go straight in. And the other room at the other end was not, it was, you entered it through the family room. So I didn't have
Mm.
to deal with trying to turn in the hallway because I couldn't fit in the laundry room or the hall bathroom because it was too narrow. So I couldn't get
Mm-hmm.
in there. But this room, which was going to be Tink's room, I could get in. Again, what are the chances, right?
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so we start dealing with the realtors and back and forth, and I'm like selling a car, one of my car, I had a car and a truck. Oh, the truck, that's another story. All these things, reminders of everything that happened. So we're like, how are we going to afford this thing? And they told us we would have to come up with 20% down, which 5 or 10% is normal. Back then it was just 5%. Like, shoot, we
Mm.
don't have any money. How are we gonna come up with 20% down? But it was the only way we could make the payments that they would give us the loan, because our payment would be $450 a month, which is
Hmm.
like, okay, great. So anyway, long story short, we begged, borrowed, and pleaded. We got money, donated from there, and they didn't have what's the thing on Facebook now? You know what I'm thinking about, where they
Oh, yeah, what's
GoFundMe. Yeah,
GoFundMe?
yeah.
Yeah,
We didn't have any
didn't have that.
GoFundMe back then.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we just we wind up, enough people. One of the nurses at the hospital gave me $200. I mean, everybody was just giving what they could, right? And in the meantime, we're dealing with this realtor, and he was a young guy, and there's somebody that knew him too. I can't remember that piece of it, but he was just the biggest curse word I could say. I mean,
Oh man.
just horrible to deal with. And
Ugh.
so he's on the phone with my wife, and she's going through the whole, oh, he's got an injury, we only have this much money, we're on a fixed income, blah blah blah. And he's like, I don't give a crap that you're on a fixed income. I don't care that your husband broke his neck and you have a new baby. You can either pay this amount or no, I don't care. And he was just, I mean, we were both just crying and thinking, how
Wow.
can somebody be this much of a jerk? You
Truly.
know? I'm like, God, talk
Eh,
about no compassion or empathy for any. I mean, even if you felt that way, you don't have to say it.
Yeah.
You
Maybe
know?
keep that hateful language to yourself, sir.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
just a nightmare. Nightmare. Anyway, we wound up coming up with the money and buying the place. And it was a 1977 double wide mobile. It was so nice. I mean, you wouldn't never expect it. And the yard was fenced. Only bad part was it was on a corner and there was
Mm.
a busy road in the neighborhood that people would fly 100 miles an hour down. Um,
Mm.
but the kids could play out in the yard and fenced yard, no problem. And then we had people from my church came over and built a ramp in the front. Now, mind you, it was very steep because there was only so much property. But in the power chair, I could get up and down it by myself. If I
Mm.
would have been in a manual chair, no way.
Yeah.
So, and then we wind up getting a loan through the county it was called a forgiven loan for people that had disabilities, needed modifications, ramp bill, whatever. But you had to own your home and you had to meet the financial criteria, which I did. So it was a 7-year forgiven loan. So basically, 1/7 of the loan went away after each year you lived there. So in 7 years, it was paid off. So if you moved before that, you'd have to pay the balance. We weren't planning on going anywhere, and we didn't. We stayed there for 13 years. But with that, my wife's brother was a contractor, so that all these contractors come out and give bids, and they were the state, the gentleman that did the processing of it all and worked on the contractor and with us that what needed to be done. He said, well, you got this much money. He said, you can probably get a deck and a ramp built on the backyard, probably a new roof, and your back bathroom so it's accessible for you. So
Hmm.
we did all that, and my brother-in-law came in with the cheapest bid because everyone else was over the mounted bid. So he just did it for what they were going to pay. So yeah, so we got a new roof, got a beautiful deck, a ramp, a bathroom that I could shower in, and showering. And I tell everybody, I said every house I went in, I bought or moved to, it doesn't matter. You're gonna have to remodel the shower. So you're gonna go at least a month or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 without taking a shower, pal. It's just the way it is. So it did. It took maybe 2 months. So you just do what they call bed baths. Wash your hair in the sink. Nowadays, you can go to the YMCA and shower if you can get there.
Oh, yeah.
But anyway, yeah, it was just, and we wind up moving in. Like the people moved out the same day we moved in. That's how close.
Oh,
That's how close everything was.
oh man.
But yeah, so just dealing with that and going through all this. In the end, it was a blessing and everything worked out. But some evil spirit tried to break our, crush our hopes and dreams.
Yeah. Well, I'm
So
glad it all worked out and that you were able to
yeah,
get the modifications made so that it could be the home that you
yeah,
needed.
yep, it was good. So
Hmm. Well, from here, I want to make sure that we touch on your decision to continue your education, but I also want to make sure that I'm going to rely on you to tell the
yeah, yeah,
story in the best order. But there's we've been talking about your daughter Tink,
yeah,
but as we've said in part one and part two, we know there's other kids too. So
yeah.
help us learn more about your family, your education,
Mhm.
and ultimately when we end this episode, I want to talk about your work as a social worker and how you
Mhm.
happen to work at the same facility where you did your spinal cord rehab.
Yeah, yep, no problem. So, you know, I was 26 years old. I wasn't lazy. I needed to work. I knew I had to do something, go back to work. I just didn't know what it was, but I knew it had to be something that where I would make enough money that I could get off state assistance or whatnot and still survive. Because, you can work and make very minimal amount of money and not lose your state assistance. So over the years, the federal government has changed, uh, some of those things, that I actually learned about as I was going through this. But, and again, that's when computers were really just starting to kind of take
Mhm.
off. People were just learning the internet and things like that. So um, even when I was an inpatient, they had a vocational rehabilitation counselor there. And when I met with her, I had met with her a few times, but one time my wife was actually there, and this counselor, caseworker, whatever you want to call her, said, well, she looked at my background, right? That my
Mhm.
no education, my grade average when I left high school, everything else. And she said, well, you might as well just do some type of customer service work because I doubt if you'll be able to do anything else. And I'd mentioned maybe going back to school or whatever. She's like, basically, I forgot how she put it, right? It's so long ago, but basically said, don't even try it, pal. You'll never succeed if you try to
Mm,
go to school or do any of those things. And
yeah.
I'm like, wow, gee, thanks for the support, lady. So, and then I'm thinking, well, she's not wrong. I hated school with a passion, wasn't very good at it. And I'm like, but I got a good work ethic. So
That's right.
anyway, and everyone I talked to, family, friends, everything, they said, oh yeah, maybe you can do something with computers. I'm like, yeah, because that's what I seem like. I'm going to be a computer person. Yeah, that's right up my alley. But it was just that's how people's mindset was,
Mm,
especially back then, right? Now you got so much technology, you can do almost anything, right? And
mhm.
so I thought, crap, I don't know what I want to do. I started, I'm like, I got to do something just to get out of the house, whatever it is. And there was a sign up at the elementary school down the street from me that said, looking for football coaches. I'm like, ooh, that's right up my alley. Or no, it said
Mhm.
looking for coaches. And I'm like, oh, I can coach. Anyway, I just assumed it was football. It was
Uh-huh.
it was basketball they were they were looking for volunteers, right? You don't get paid for any of this stuff. And I'm
Uh-huh.
like, well, I played a lot of basketball in my day too. I'm like, I know basketball. I'm like, but like it's gonna be so hard not being able to physically demonstrate how to shoot, how to pass, all these things. I'm like, I'm really gonna have to use my communication skills, which at that time I didn't know how good those were, right? So anyway, I thought, oh, that's probably, and again, right, my big God thing. Football's
Mm,
outside in the Northwest, it's rainy, it's cold. I'm like, at least I'd be inside where it's warm.
yeah.
So I said, all right, I'll do it. So I wind up coaching a fourth grade boys team there. I wind up coaching them through fourth, fifth, and sixth grade till they got out of elementary school. Became really good friends with one of the families, to where they were coming over our house and Super Bowl, everything. So
Oh,
yeah, so again, right? People you meet,
yep.
so many people because of this injury that I never want. So many experiences
Hmm.
meeting all those kids, right? Did I have any
Yeah.
impact on those kids' life, right? Who knows? But I did run into one of the kids later. He was like 23 years old, and he comes up to me and says, "Hey, coach." Still called me coach because
Yeah.
that's how he
Because you're
knew.
coach. Yeah.
And being in the power chair, and I'm just easily recognizable. And he was what, 11, 12. He's 23 years old, married, had a kid. I'm like, oh my gosh. I'm like,
Wow.
boy, do I feel old. So,
Yeah,
um,
no
you
kidding.
know, and I ran into other kids down the road from my daughter's basketball team too. It's just so
Hmm.
weird that because I don't recognize any of them. They were little kids when I saw them, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, so I did that. And again, it was something I didn't need transportation to. So, again, as I thought, I'm like, I'm gonna have to go to school to do something. And again, people are like, well, do something you like, do something you love, you'll never work a day in your life, that kind of crap, right? So I'm like, well, I love sports, but you know, you can't, what am I gonna do that will pay me enough? I could be a radio DJ. I'm like, yeah, I like to talk. I can get on the radio and do that. But yeah, I can talk about sports all day long. But that would consist of traveling. I mean, going to games. Most of the stuff would probably be in Seattle. I'm like, I can't drive up there and get there. They just weren't realistic, right? But again, people are like, oh, follow your dreams. You can do whatever you want. And I'm like, well, let me just start with, let me go to Pierce College and see what they say. So it's a community college here in town. And so I went and talked to a guidance counselor there, and then they had one specifically for students with disabilities. So anyway, I met with her a couple times and we talked, and I'm like, okay, let's give it a try. But first, I had to get my GED
Oh,
because
right.
I didn't graduate. So, but I knew this again, this is a lot, years later, but I knew this kid in high school that took the GED and passed no problem, and it wasn't the brightest bulb. So I'm like, oh, I know I can pass that no problem. So I went in, took the test, passed it. Didn't have to take any of the courses or whatever. But my scores weren't so high that I could jump to certain courses. So like in the math, especially, I had to start at the bottom,
Mm.
which was fine, but man, that statistic class almost killed me. So
Oh, yeah.
so I wound up just taking a couple 3 credit classes at first just to see if I could even do it, right?
Mm.
With transportation, the caregiving. So what I wind up doing is getting to the college like 2 hours before my class starting, or that's how I planned it. So if my shuttle was late, I could still get there on time. So, I would arrange it 2 hours, 3 hours before my class started. And if I got there early, I would just go to the library, study, do whatever, right? And
Hmm.
sometimes I would literally get there 5 minutes before class started. So, um,
Wow.
but yeah, so I did a first couple classes, and I'm like, okay, this is okay. And then I took, one of them, which was just like a beginning course for computers or whatnot. I figure, okay, that's going to be my ticket anyway. I'm gonna have to learn how to use these things regardless of what I do. So
Mm-hmm.
let's do that. And they had a person that worked for the college that's what they did. They worked with people with disabilities on computer skills and things like that. They had some adaptive. That was the first Dragon Speak was the first voice activated control you could use to write with and whatnot. So I tried that anyway, and then I thought, okay, let me get started here. And so there was a certain amount of English classes, certain amount of math classes. You had to take some psychology, some speech class. There were certain classes on there that you just had to take. And then there was electives. And I don't know if you went to school and did all that or whatever, you probably already know this. So I'm like, okay. I said, all right, well, here are my two weaknesses that are gonna be the most work. English, because it's gonna be a lot of writing, and math. It's
Mm-hmm.
horrible at math. And so again, right, work smarter, not harder. So
Mm-hmm.
every every quarter, I never took a math class and an English class at the same time. So,
Mm.
so I think I went through the math first because I wanted to get that over it. So I would take a math class and then a speech class and then maybe my elective, whatever that may be. I think I had to take an anthropology class too, but you find out a lot of things, right? And again,
Mm-hmm.
how many people in that school? I'm still friends with one of the people I met at the school, even the
Mm-hmm.
counselor I still talk to. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but gosh, I was like, I remember being so impressed with these young people, right? Oh, gosh, they are so dang smart. I'm like, they wrote a paper last night. I've been working on it for 2 months. I'm like, especially when I got the bachelor, my undergrad, I'm like, man, these kids are smart and impressive. So anyway, one of the classes I wound up taking was like a careers course, what do you want to
Yeah.
do? What's your style, learning style, personality, all these things. And the gentleman that taught it was just wonderful. And I wound up taking like 2 or 3 more classes on. He did a class on masculinity and
Mm.
what that looked like and what it means and how how society makes us out to be certain things. Like I kind of mentioned it before, but oh my
Mm-hmm.
gosh, I learned so much from him about that. And one of the things through that class, and just going to keep getting off track a little bit, but he taught me, through it all and through the whole disability thing is I learned that I was going to teach my daughter more about love from this wheelchair than I ever could walking.
Oh my gosh.
And I was like, oh man,
That's powerful.
yeah. So I was like, you're right. Years later, there was another story with a young little girl with a disability. Um, could never speak, couldn't hear, and she lived to be 7 years old. But and I don't remember who said it, one of the family members or something. I read it in the newspaper. Said that young girl taught us more about love without ever saying a word than anyone else could ever do. And I was like, that just hit me so hard.
That's
But
yeah,
but
powerful.
yeah, I'm like, oh, the school thing ain't too bad. It's kind of, and I tell people, I said, the idea of having to go to school scared me more than ever walking again. And
Wow.
I wasn't even exaggerating. I'm like, so I hated school. I wasn't good at it, let alone being a quadriplegic. I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna have to stay healthy. My caregivers, I gotta get there. I'm like, I had so many obstacles. Um, but I think in 7 years of schooling, I maybe missed 4 days.
Good
So
for you.
so that
Gosh.
was, and again, right? Is it me taking care of myself, genetics, God, whatever? I think it's all of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so anyway, so I get, through my associate's degree and I do it. It took me about 2.5 years. Again, the younger population were taking 17, 20 credits a quarter. I was taking 12 at the most. And that was considered a full-time schedule. So,
Mm-hmm.
and I got federal grants for all of that to pay
Oh,
for
great.
everything. And then even a stipend on top of that. So like every quarter, I would have an extra $400 or $500 just because. So,
Good.
we lived,
Yeah.
that helped us out a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And then, yeah, I think I left there at the 3.5 GPA
Wow.
when I was done. So yeah, so that was pretty cool. So then anyway, so I'm like, okay, now I got to transfer. What am I gonna do? Where am I gonna go? And I remember the social worker I worked with at the hospital. She just had a bachelor's degree in social work, a BSW. And I'm like, okay, that's what I want to get. I don't just want a bachelor's in science or whatever. I need a
Yeah.
accredited social work program to get my BSW, and Pacific Lutheran University had one, which fortunately wasn't far. It was the same distance as the Pierce College, just on the other side. So I
Hmm.
could get there by bus, by shuttle, whatever. So, and the social worker in the hospital, I told her I was going to take her job one day. And I literally was just kidding. I had no
Uh-huh.
I had no clue what I was going to do with my life.
Yeah.
I didn't figure I'd go to school and be a social worker, that's for dang sure. And that's what, after taking that careers class, people, you were looking at marriage and family therapy, counseling. I'm like, I can talk to people. I need to do something. I can't sit in front of a computer all day. And
Mm-hmm.
after going through that class and learning about all the different degrees in education, what I learned was you can do 20 different jobs with the social work degree.
Yeah.
Work in a jail, you can work in a school, you can work in a hospital, you can, work at a college, all these things. And so I'm like, okay, because I had heard too many stories about people going to school, getting a degree, and then doing something absolutely different than what they got their degree in. So
Right.
I didn't want to do that. So
Mm-hmm.
um, anyway, I went to PLU, and man, that was one of the greatest experiences ever. And it was easier than getting my associates. That Because that was the hard part. When I got to PLU, I knew all the tricks. I knew how to study.
Mm.
I knew, I was a procrastinator. I knew that about myself. So
Yeah.
therefore, I did anything. Like
Mm-hmm.
I said, I usually had every assignment done 2 weeks before it was due. And so I could
Wow.
go back over it and question everything I did. Not but I did. So anyway, I graduated from PLU with a 3.8
Whoa.
GPA. So I went from 0.8 to 3.8.
Yeah. Good on
So,
you.
and again, it was just working at it. And
Mm-hmm.
PLU, they paid for like one of the other students, because they had all these jobs for students. They paid for one of my classmates to take notes and might be a scribe
Mm.
for me.
Yeah.
And then I did all my tests on a computer. I got extra time, whatever. So the girl that was my scribe, oh my gosh, just incredible. Like I said, there were so many, especially at PLU, these young
Yeah.
people. I was like so amazed with all of them, and her the most. And we just, again, it was just meant to be that we got tied together. I hadn't, I've probably seen her once since we graduated in 2001. I saw her last year. We met for coffee. She's still, oh my gosh, she's just the most incredible, one of the smartest, brightest, people I've ever seen in my life. And just
Wow.
still there, same person. So yeah, so that was kind of cool. So I was going through my bachelor's degree, they would have all these graduate social work programs, come and talk to you, come and talk to you. And I'm like, I am not going to more school to get a master's degree. I'm like, and I just kept thinking my social worker only had a bachelor's degree. So I know I could get a job with a bachelor's degree.
Right.
Everybody I talked to said, you better get that master's. You better
Mm.
go and get that master's degree. And I'm like stomping my feet, no pun intended, saying, God, please don't make me go to more schooling. I don't want to do it. But
Yeah.
they talked me into it, and as I thought about it, it did make sense. I'm like, I'm already in the school mode. I'm never going to go back later. Like a lot of students took a year or two off and then went back. I'm like, I'm never going to be able to do that. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to do it. I better just do it. So, anyway, I wound up going to the university, got, applied first. You got to apply to get into school, then you got to apply to get in the social work program. And so the University of Washington had a satellite campus in Tacoma, which is on the same road, 5 miles down the road from where PLU was. So anyway, I got in there, got in the social worker program, which at that time they were only taking 35 students. So, but they said they probably had about 70 applicants. So it was real small back then. Now they got like 500 applicants or something, maybe even more.
Whoa.
So anyway, I got in, and the program I got in on was through Children's Administration, through the Department of Social and Health Services, basically signing up with them paying for your school, but you had to guarantee work for them after your schooling for 21 months. And I'm like, well, heck, I can do anything for 21 months. I'm going to need a job to get some experience. I don't care what it is at this point. It's something social worky. That's all I did. I was working, turned out to be, CPS, Child Protective Services, but so yeah, and grad school, oh my gosh, piece of cake. It was like, it was so, like I said, every step got easier. I don't know why I was so scared, but it was almost like, because PLU was, again, an accredited social work program. So a lot of kids coming in, or not even kids, but there are other adults, and they're even older than me, that were, had degrees in other things, undergrad degrees and stuff. So for me, it was like picking up where I left off. I'm like, this is all social. I know, I was already taught this. I already know it. It's just like hearing it again. So it was a piece of cake. So anyway, did the grad school thing. Again, left there, I think, with a 3.8 grade point average again.
Wow.
So yeah, so that was pretty cool to even do that. The first one in my family to ever go to college. All right. So obviously the first one to ever have a master's degree. So that was pretty cool. But as I was going to PLU, I had contacted the Division of Vocational Rehab about a van, getting one modified that I could drive. Because I knew they were out there, and I knew the vocational rehab were there, and I knew they would, their whole mission is to provide people with disabilities, whatever adaptation or accommodation they need to work. And I thought I was only getting a bachelor's degree. So when I approached them, I told them my whole story. We went through everything, and then I told them, but I've been thinking about going to grad school, because thinking they won't give you a vehicle or help you unless you have a job or have one, that you can get. You just need this accommodation. So when I told them that, I thought, well, there's no way they're gonna get me a van right now, because if I go to grad school anyway. Who knew? They said, oh no, we'll get you the van. You go ahead and go to grad school. So, and what I come to find out, right, later, after you learn all this stuff, is that the more money I made, the better it looked for their program. If I went and got my master's degree and made it to work, and the fact that I was, a few months away from getting my bachelor's, they knew I was serious. They knew I was almost done with school. This is my grade point average. I'm gonna graduate. I'm gonna go to work. So shoot, they got me the van, adapted it. I didn't have to pay a dime for it. And the grad school was paid through that program, through the Department of Social and Health Services. So the only money I ever spent for school, I did take out one small loan when I was at PLU. It's a private university. Get a lot of scholarships and things for it, but there was still little I had to pay. So, but right, like, I'm going to complain through the whole thing. I got all those both schools paid for and a vehicle paid for, right? But
That's amazing.
at the same time, I was working my ass off to do it.
Yeah, you were. Yeah.
And lucky enough to stay healthy enough to do it.
Do you think that having your van was part of what made your master's program that much easier too, with not the coordinating and the getting in there 2 hours before class or
It did, but when I said that, I was specifically just the work.
academically?
Yeah,
Yeah,
just
okay.
academically part was just a piece of cake. And me and like the one, there was one lady there who I became really good friends with. We were kind of like, you know, always together. We'd always go eat together, go to class together, whatever. And she was a Tacoma police officer, and she said, I just want to do something else, and she was gonna like, why'd you choose this of all things? So, but anyway, so yeah, you just meet people from all walks of life that
Wow.
it was just it was fascinating, all the people you meet. And again, never would have happened if I would have been walking, right? So
Yeah.
I would have installed flooring my whole life because I loved it.
Yeah.
Sad part of it is I would have made more money doing that than I do now with the masters,
Oh.
but it is what it is. So
Hmm.
yeah, so graduated, and then I had to go to work at Child Protective Services, but I still had to get a job there.
Hmm.
And I think, what was the other thing? Oh, you had to get a job within 6 months getting out of school. So I graduated in June, and it worked out perfect. So I didn't get a job until November, but I had all that summer. I had so much time to just again, rest and figure out what I was going to do. And so I enjoyed all that time off. I went to school every summer. I didn't take
Hmm.
any time off. So again, where everyone else was taking 17, 20 credits, I couldn't take summers off. I started grad school 10 days after I graduated from my associate's degree.
Wow, that's a
Yeah.
real tight turnaround.
I
Yeah.
went right into it.
Hmm.
No stopping. So
Hmm.
um, so yeah, so I finally got a call from Child Protective Services from the intake supervisor. So I went in, did an interview. She called me back for a second interview and then offered me the job. And I'm like, okay, yeah, sure, this is great. So when people called to report child abuse and neglect, I was the one that answered the phone and took the initial reports. And oh my gosh, it was just fascinating because I really would have liked to be in a cop or a detective or something. And there's so much detective kind of work. You couldn't believe it. But we had access
Mm.
to people's license plates. I mean, we had everything that we could look up. I mean, I found this one guy who was, turned out to be a child molester. I knew that at the time, and I was able to find him from his first name and three letters of his license plate. And the
Wow.
cops were able to track him down and arrest him. So it was just so
Good.
yeah, it was just so cool. And I loved it. And I wound up meeting one of my best friends that we're still best friends today. And we both left the department in 2008. So, all this time we've remained pretty good friends. But yeah, so I did that for 4 years. So let me back up now. So through this whole process, my wife's family, so she has two brothers and a sister. They're all from Ohio. The brothers live here, and her sister still lives in Ohio. None of them had a really close relationship except her one brother and her, and he's the second youngest. His name's Eric. They had the closest relationship mostly because he lived closer. Her one brother that did the construction stuff on my house. So him
Hmm.
and the sister were practicing Jehovah's Witnesses, and so they got into a lot of spirituality, religion talk with my wife, and finally they just like politics. They just decided to let's just not talk about it anymore.
Yeah.
So they weren't super close, but the one brother, he was in a biker gang.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, his their biological dad was very abusive to both the kids and his wife, my mother-in-law. And
Mm-hmm.
so, I mean, my brother-in-law, he had actually gotten shot in the head one time,
Oh.
survived. And back then they were just almost like hippies. They would, one brother-in-law, ah, was that yeah, hitchhiked all the way to Texas one time and all the way back. I'm like, guess they didn't know about the serial killers in the 70s, but
No kidding.
they should, being from Washington. But
Yeah.
anyway, so the brother kind of lived in and out. He worked part-time stuff, but eventually he wound up just getting into too many drugs and alcohol. But in the meanwhile, he was doing all this. He met a girl and wind up he had two kids from her, a
Mm.
boy, and then 14 months later, a girl. And the girlfriend, was the same lifestyle, just drinking, drugs, everything.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so eventually, and meanwhile, my wife is going over to her mom's house doing work at her hair salon there, taking my daughter with her, and my Joe and Elena, who were my niece and nephew from Eric, were always there too, and my mother-in-law. So they all got to play, and they came over to my house a lot for the weekends. My wife would just take them, bring them over for the weekend. Because it just wasn't good when they were with their mom or their dad. They would just say horrible things about the other one. They'd be drinking and driving with them in the car. I mean, you name,
Oh man.
about the only thing they heard him say, he would say horrible things about their mom. And, the only thing they didn't do was, you know, well, there was some physical abuse, but not by their hands in other ways, but,
Yeah.
uh, so anyway, Child Protective Services got involved. Now, mind you, I am working at Child Protective Services, and
Mm-hmm.
so that was kind of okay. This ain't awkward. Um,
Yeah.
and I had already, let me back up, through grad school. I had to do an internship there as well. And
Mm-hmm.
I did it in the adolescent drug court unit because I really thought I wanted to work with adolescents at that time. I even
Mm-hmm.
I did a internship also at the juvenile court with the probation officer. It's fascinating again, which so I was doing all this. I did all kinds of volunteer stuff.
Yeah.
I was on a board for a Center for Independence agency that was at the hospital years ago that helped me. So I was just trying to, I didn't have a lot of work experience, so I had to get a lot of intern volunteer experiences to put on a resume, right? Uh,
Mm-hmm.
so one of the internships I did while I was in grad school was at an alternative high school. Kids that, a lot of come from a lot of troubled families, whatever. So love that. I taught a parenting class to young moms that were all under 18, and they
Yeah.
had a daycare right there on site. I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
who am I to be teaching a parenting class? But I just had to go by the syllabus. They had a whole training kit, so I
Yeah.
I did that. That was fascinating. Years
Mm-hmm.
later, I go into a Taco Bell. This girl goes, "I remember you." And I'm like,
Oh.
and sure enough, she was from the class, and it's like 10 years later. She's like,
Oh.
I still use some of those techniques she taught us. I'm like,
No way.
like,
Wow.
again, right? It's just crazy the stuff that stories I could tell that like that. But
Mm-hmm.
anyway, sorry, it's just going back to school. So I worked at Child Protective Services. My brother-in-law was gonna have his kids taken away. So they approached my wife and said, "Hey, are you able to care for these children?" And they always look at family first. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and if they can't find family, then the kids could go in foster care. So
Okay.
we already knew how that system worked, and so we're like, yeah, we'll take them, we'll care for them. And my wife's like, I knew from the day they were born I was gonna get them. She said
Oh.
because I knew their lifestyle and everything,
Yeah.
and so anyway, eventually they approached us about legally adopting them. And
Mm-hmm.
so we were like, gotcha. You know, really struggled with it. No, not so much struggled with it, but had to talk about it. Oh, darn, sorry about that. Let me back up again. So I'm trying to remember if I was in undergrad or grad school. Let's see, 2000 had to be undergrad. Yeah, undergrad. So I have my mom, dad, my two sisters in California still. So
Mhm.
my youngest sister, 17, same thing, partying, drugs, everything,
Yeah.
got pregnant and
Mm.
has has this little girl. Um, and so, you know, I'm on the phone with her and my mom a lot, and my mom says she's pretty much raising her. You know, my sister's gone all the time. It's just baby cries. It's just not a good situation. And my mom was, you know, she wasn't ready to raise another child either. So anyway, I talked to my sister and I said, well, if you want, I'll take her. But if I do, I'm not giving her back. I'm not going to play this
Hmm.
back and forth game. I said, so
Mm-mm.
you better be sure. And mind you, Child Protective Services isn't involved in this at all. I said, you know, I'll take her, but you know, whatever. She'll know you're her mom. We're not going to keep any secrets. But this is what will going to happen. And we had already planned on going down there for Christmas that year. So anyway, I talked to her, and then like 2, 3 months later, she called me up and said, okay, you can you can take her. She's just thought that was the best thing she could do as a mom for her. And I'm like, all
Hmm.
right. I'm like, okay. So we went down to California for Christmas and brought her back home with us. She was 19 months. Uh
19 months.
yeah,
Wow.
19 months. So
Okay.
Tink has a little sister just and we went to got home, opened the front door. She ran through the door like she'd been lived there forever.
Oh,
And
it's like I'm
so
home.
yeah, I'm home. So anyway, so that worked out good. We had to go through the legal adoption process for her as well, which meant finding the biological father because it was kind of a one night stand thing with my sister. She knew who it was, and my best friend Leon, his girlfriend lived right across the street from, or her parents lived right across the street from this kid's parents. So
Oh.
so my friend Leon knew who he was. And so you know, we got an adoption attorney and she said, this is what you have to do. You have to, you know, try and contact this father and let him know any way you can. She said you have to put an ad in the newspaper where he lives. So in San Jose, and then they said his mom lived in Reno. Someone lived in Reno. And so we had to put an ad in Reno newspaper, and it had to be in there for like a certain amount of time before they would say, okay, you can adopt her. My
Mm.
sister signed all the papers we needed. And then I actually wound up, I was able to find him myself. And so I got a phone number and everything. So I called him and told him the situation. And he said, okay. I said, okay, I'm going to send you some papers. Will you sign them and send them back? He said, yeah. So he did that. And my sister signed hers. So we went to court and adopted her. Now, in the meantime, this is before my niece and nephew got taken away by CPS. We had my other daughter first. We got off the plane and came out of the airport, and my buddy that dropped us off picked us up and saw we had another kid and said, "Man, you guys work fast," because we didn't tell anybody. So yeah, so
Yeah.
anyway, that was kind of funny. So
Yeah.
and then we go through the whole thing with you know, the other two kids. We wind up adopting them. We foster cared them for a long time. So
Mhm.
we were doing a foster to adopt thing.
Yeah.
And so we were able to foster care them for a long time. So in the meantime, while we are going through that process, their biological mom is pregnant again. And she winds up having twins, a boy and a girl. And we're like, oh no. And so they were already going to take the kids from her because she had lost the other two kids.
Yeah.
But they had actually volunteered, well, the mother did. She voluntarily gave up the rights to those kids so we could adopt them. Brother didn't, and then he would never show up for court. It just got prolonged. He was just a bozo about it, you know. So
Yeah.
eventually they said, all right, we're done with him. You're going to be able to adopt these two. Anyway, come to find out down the road that the twins were not my brother-in-laws. They're
Mm.
some other gentleman that
Uh-huh.
the mom was actually best friends with his girlfriend. So, and she was pregnant too. So this
Oh.
guy had, and that mom had her kid the day before the twins were born. So this guy had three kids being born by two different women, same hospital, 2 days, a day apart. So
Oh my God.
thinking, oh, he's a real Mac Daddy, ain't he?
Oh.
Anyway, so they actually tried to fight it. Here, the other thing is so we knew they weren't our family members, right? But they were
Mhm.
family members, brother and sister to the two we adopted. But my thing was, I'm like, look, like I didn't think I'd be a good enough dad for four kids, one kid, let alone six. And
6.
yeah, and so through this whole process, I'm going to school and then I wind up working for Child Protective Services. And so I got all this going on. And in the meantime, at least a lot of it, our meetings were where I worked. So I didn't have to drive.
Yeah. There
I
you
didn't have to
go.
go. I didn't have to go anywhere. But they were able to put the twins with us, even though we weren't biologically related, because there was some mention of biological mom being Native American, having some Native American in her. Uh,
Uh-huh.
I don't think nobody. She should have said she had 1/16 of this tribe from Oklahoma, whatever.
Mm.
Wait, nobody knows if that's ever true, but
Mm.
we didn't care because it then allowed us to foster care them so they could be with their brother and sister.
Mm. And is that
And
a native thing where
yes.
there's a okay,
Yes.
keep the
And
family
it's
together.
yeah, you always have to ask. And the way they worded it back then was it's quote, keeping the tribe together. So
Okay. Yeah.
so we were able to foster them and then we wind up and I really struggled with this one because I was like, I don't think we can give them, enough, and we went to our pastor. I mean, we prayed about it, and my wife wanted. She said, "Oh no, we're getting them," and I'm like, I don't know if I can do that.
Man.
I talked to everybody I could talk to. We were in our pastor's office one time, and he said, "Well, hey, look at it this way: just say yes, and if it's not meant to be, God will make sure it doesn't happen. If you're not supposed to be their dad, he'll make sure it doesn't happen. Don't worry about it."
Mm-hmm.
I was like,
Yeah.
huh. I said, huh, okay. That's
Yeah.
good. I can have
I can
that
do
kind of
that. Yeah.
I can have that kind of faith.
Yeah.
And sure enough, we got them. So, they're all Tink is 30, Joe is 28, Elaine is 27, Carly's 26, and the twins are 24.
Oh my
So,
gosh.
yeah. So, and another interesting thing was my wife was in the room at all four of their births. Not my daughter from California, but the four up here. She was in the room when they were all born. So,
That's incredible.
yeah. So we have six kids now in this three-bedroom mobile home, right? So I got
Hmm.
four girls in this little 10 by 12 room, had bunk beds. Two of them slept on one, two slept, and the two boys in the other room. Um, so yeah, so it was,
Hmm.
and then go
Can
ahead.
I ask a quick question about, so you're working at Child Protective Services while you're hearing about, I'm going to use the term abuse,
Yeah.
neglect of Joe
Yep.
and Elena.
Okay.
And I also know that social workers are mandatory reporters.
Correct.
So how did that play out with and I'm sure, I would imagine even when you're in undergrad, there's some level of like, if you're in a
Mhm.
social work program where you're required to disclose to authorities if you know about that.
Yeah.
How did that play out with those two and your
Yeah.
job?
Yeah, well, they had enough information that I really didn't have. I had no
Oh, okay.
proof. I had no proof of anything, and actually, you don't have to have proof. You just have to suspect it. You,
Right.
if you think there's abuse or neglect going on, you're right. It's mandated report. You have to call it in. And again, I don't remember all the circumstances back then, but
Yeah, it was a while ago.
yeah, they had been, I don't remember ever making a report or calling myself.
Okay, so there was like established
Yeah,
some other people had disclosed that information. You
yeah.
weren't the awkward brother-in-law that's like,
Mhm.
okay, now I have to
Yeah.
do this
Yeah.
for my
So,
job.
yep, those caseworkers and social workers were already involved.
Okay.
And like I said, and then my wife's like, she's like, I knew we were gonna get the twins too. And my brother-in-law, so again, I told you, he kept saying, they're not mine. They're not mine, I'm telling you. And they wound up having to do a DNA test with him and the other guy and everything to find out, oh my gosh, she was right. They're not his. None of us believed them. So yeah.
Wow.
And but at the time when the twins were born, him and his biker friend guy were in the parking lot drinking a bottle of tequila, and the mom, this is how they were, she left it up to him to name them. And so he named them Max and Amelia, and he came up with the name, drunk, talking with his friend, drinking tequila, saying, "Who's that? Who's that emperor from Mexico, Maximilian or whatever?" So that's how he came up with the name Maximilia, tequila and so when we got him, my wife's like, "Oh yeah, I'm changing those names." And no kid,
Oh.
there ain't no kids of mine gonna be named by some drunk guy in a parking lot, and they're not even kids. And she was like, "Rah, rah." She changed their names to Elijah and Serene. So,
Mm,
and they've been have had those names their whole life, and they go by.
hmm.
So legally adopted, they all have my last name. It was everything was legal. So yeah,
Wow.
so I wind up in 2004, I called the rehab center where I was, because I was the chairman on the board of directors of this um, independent living disability advocacy center, and we were looking for board members. So
Mm,
I had thought, I still had enough connections at the hospital. I wasn't there as often as I was in the years before,
hmm.
because I was just busy going to school, work and everything. So I called over there to get the old director's number because I knew she retired. I'm like, oh, she'd be good to have on the board. And I called, and Lynn, the current director, who was a speech therapist when I was a patient, and our kids played basketball together, said, first I said, "Hey, Lynn, this is John." She said, "Oh, you calling about the job?" And I said, "What job?" She said, "Oh, she said, we're hiring a social worker." I'm like, well, and here's the fascinating part to all this, right? God thing all the way is, I've always said, the minute you don't look forward, or the minute you dread going to work, you need to get a new job, because you're just gonna be
Mm,
miserable. You're gonna make everyone around you miserable. And I was
hmm.
just getting to that point at my job that I wasn't enjoying it like I used to.
Hmm.
And then my friend Candy that sat next to me, and everyone talks about calls, we just consulted, everybody bounced everything off each other.
Hmm.
And we were going out to eat, our whole group, and she was riding with me, and I wound up taking this job, right? So we were going on this drive, and I said, "I got something to tell you." And she goes, "Oh no," she said it first. She said, "John, I got something to tell you." I'm like, "Really? I got something to tell you too." She's like, "Oh my," it's like we were breaking up or something. She said, "I'm leaving intake." I'm like, "What?" And I'm like, "Well, guess what? So am I." So we both wound up leaving at the same time. So I
Mm,
went and did the interview for the hospital job, and I was horribly sick that day. I probably shouldn't have went, but I went, and I made it through the interview with the director. And it was a different director that ran the case manager department, and about seven case managers and social workers. I had to sit in the room and answer all these questions. But my director pretty much told that director to hire me, right? I would have had to show up drunk not to get the job. Anyway, I got the job, and 17 years later, I'm still there. So And so that was,
So cool.
yeah, so that was 2008. I was at CPS from 2004, 2008. And then we moved, bought a new house. And again, we had to sell the other house to buy this one. And so
Hmm.
again, it had to happen quickly. But I finally had a job. I was there for 4 years. We had some money saved up. We got adoption support for the kids, so we still
Oh,
had
good.
some extra income until they turned 18. Anyway, so we were just kind of looking at houses here and there. Sometimes we'd give up on it and then go back. And I just happened to look in the paper one day, or maybe it was on the internet, and I saw this house. And I we didn't follow any of the real estate rules. I just showed up, and Tink was with me, and we came. I said, "Tink, knock on the door," because there was a step I couldn't get up. So she,
Uh-huh.
so she knocked on the door, and the guy answered, elderly guy, and I said, "Hey, I saw the house for sale. Just, I know this is, not the way to go about these things, but I thought I'd just stop by and see you." And
Yeah.
he said, "Yeah, no problem. Come on in." So I had ramps in the back of my van. So
Oh.
I had Tink get those out. She set them. Now, mind you, she's 13, 14 at the time. And so we go in the house, and it's him and his wife, and we're talking. We talked for 2 hours. And then come to find out, they're Christians. We prayed together, and
Oh.
and then he said, "Well, our real estate agent's great." He said, "I can call him right now." Because I told him, I said, "Oh, we got to sell our other house, all this stuff." He said, "I can call him right now." So he calls his real estate agent, says, "Yeah, I can meet you at your house in like an hour." I'm like, "Okay." So I call my wife from their phone and say, "Hey, there's a real estate guy coming to our house in about an hour. I'll tell you about it later." So, right, how often does that happen where the same guy sells and buys the house, right?
Yeah.
But it worked out perfect because he got the deal done just in time to where we can move in here. So I moved in here I got my job at the hospital in February of '08, moved in here in May of '08, got my little puppy in June of '08. So '08 was a big deal. So
Yeah.
anyway, I never thought I would like to live on a corner cul-de-sac lot with no fenced backyard. I tell you what, it was so great because the whole
Mm.
neighborhood would just come up. There were so many kids in this neighborhood that my kids finally got to go out in the street and play with other kids. Um,
Oh.
but when they were in the other house, they had no way they could go outside. They had to stay in the yard, and they really didn't need any friends because they had each other. So
Mm.
I mean, they did have friends. That we had so many dang birthday parties, obviously. Um, but uh, but anyway, yeah. So we moved in here. Tink was 14. We had all the younger kids switch schools, but Tink was in junior high. So I kept her at the same school for 2 years and drove her back and forth. Well, I dropped her
Mhm.
off in the morning, and Jenny picked her up. And then they all went to the same schools that weren't too right around the block from here. All graduated from there. So already they were better than me. Um, but yeah, it just worked out great. They had a great so many kids to play with, they didn't know what to do with themselves. So um
Wow.
yeah, but yeah, so that there's so yeah, I wind up I had 6 teenagers in the house at one time. And I finally hit me one day. I'm like, holy cow. I'm like, now I know I'm in the wheelchair. I'm like, it was never about me. It
Oh.
was always about them. Because if
Mm.
I wasn't, one of them would be in the hospital and I'd be in jail. Jokingly, right? Because you try living with 6 teenagers. So I was like, don't
Yeah.
you talk to your mother that
That's
way? It's just like, I'm like, holy cow. I'm like, it was literally God saving me and them. So,
that's
and,
hilarious.
and then I thought, what was I thinking? Wanting to work in a high school with adolescents.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
turned out I didn't have to.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, I can tell you a little bit or a lot about my job now as a
Yeah.
social worker. So
Yeah, that'd be
um,
great.
yeah, so I get a job in the rehab unit where I was a patient, and
Hmm.
one of my nurses that I had on the floor when I was a patient was a case manager. So the case manager and social worker work like hand in hand, right?
Okay.
And this particular nurse had totally had my same sense of humor, same sarcasm. I mean, you name it, right? And so the first day I was there, they were taking me around, showing me stuff or whatever. And I ran into her and I shook my head and I'm like, man, you must have done something really bad in your past life to have this happen. have, have me come back and haunt you. I mean,
Oh.
this is the kind of sense of humor she had. When I was a patient, something was going on with my body that I just wasn't feeling right. And there was a CNA in there or whatever. So she went out and got the nurse, and she was the nurse that night. And she comes in and, she looks real professional. She's got the whole white nurse suit, the white shoes. She was just really, really put together, right? You'd never know it after you talk to her, but she's just hilarious. But so she came in, she's got her arms folded, and she's listening to what the CNA is telling her. And then I'm telling her stuff about my symptoms. And she looks at me and she goes, face, well, that's horrible. You might die. And that was it. And then she laughed, and I'm like, oh my, and so, it turns out the whole place has this sense of humor, but me and her together were just, insufferable. She wound up leaving. I've been through like multiple other social workers and case managers. Like I'm the only one that's still there after all these years. But my boss right now, my direct supervisor, again, was one of my nurses when I was a patient. So I always joke with her. I'm like, you can never fire me because you see me naked. So I'm sure I could sue for something. But she just laughed. So. But anyway, so my job now, it consists of, now we have 3 case managers and I'm the only social worker. So I'll just kind of tell you about, what I do now. And
That'd be great.
if you have
Yeah, I feel
any
like I
questions.
am probably not the only person who, like, when you and I first started talking on the phone, however long ago that was, I conceptually understand that there's different types of social work, but often what comes to mind, I think, just like in our culture, is that like
Yeah,
the DPS social worker that's
yeah,
checking in on kids or like elder abuse
yeah,
situations. But like you said, there's so many different ways that social work shows up in our public institutions. And so
yeah,
it's really interesting to hear how your work in a rehab clinic, a trauma rehab clinic, how that looks
yeah.
and what your
Yep.
day to day is like and how you work with other staff.
Yeah, no problem. And you're right. People either think I'm there to take their kids or that I can give them something.
Yeah, yeah, I bet.
I got something they need, or I'm going to take their kids is their first thought. So
Yeah.
I'm going to back up just a little bit because one of
Hmm.
my internships I did was when the Center for Independence was connected to the hospital. The director of social work at that time had to be my like sign off on my master's degree practicum. And so
Mm.
I necessarily didn't work under her, but we finagled it to where I could do that work. She could sign off on it. I did do some stuff in the hospital, but by the end of that internship, I knew one thing was for sure. I did not want to work in a hospital.
Mm.
So the ironies just kept on keeping on. So,
Yeah.
but anyway, I love my job. And people ask me what I do, right? And for me, it's really so hard to put into words. My daughter was in my office one day and she said, Dad, what do you do all day? What do you do? And I'm like, what don't I do? And
Mm.
my coworker was in the office and she's like, you know what he does? I'll tell you what he does. And she rambled off for 10 minutes. And I'm like,
Oh,
wow. I'm like, that was perfect. I'm like, can we record that so when people ask
yeah.
me to do, I can just play? And
Push a button. Yeah.
yeah. And I was like, what she said. Yeah. But anyway, so kind of my main roles, right? I work with all these doctors, nurses. We have a multidisciplinary team of speech therapists, occupational therapists, physical therapists, psychologists, a therapeutic recreation therapist. You name it, we got it. So, our patients there, they mostly they're stroke patients, and if you know anything
Mm.
about strokes, there's very different levels, right? Kind of
Hmm.
like spinal cord injuries and brain injuries, right? You might have a slight brain injury, might have a very severe, tragic brain injury that, leaves you, unable to do most things. And same with the
Mm-hmm.
stroke, right? Some people have strokes and they can talk to you and tell you what's going on. They just have paralysis on one side. Others have strokes and they can't talk. They can't tell you anything. And so the speech therapists work a lot with those folks. And it's challenging for me a lot of times because the legal stuff comes into play when people don't have power of attorneys,
Mm.
and they need services from the state and they can't access their spouses or partners or even sons or daughters or moms or dads financial information because they're not on their bank account, so they can't apply for state services. I mean, all that stuff
Mm.
I have to get involved in, and it's really up to me as a notary as to whether I think that individual can cognitively know what they're signing, right? If they're signing power of attorney to somebody, you know, I always go consult with speech therapists, consult with the neuropsychologist, consult with the doctor, so I can put it all in my note. And then even if all of them say, "Oh yeah, they'll know what they're signing," I think they have capacity to do that. I can still say no if I
Mm.
if I'm not sure, right?
Yeah.
But if all of them said no, then I would certainly say no. I wouldn't go
Mm-hmm.
against that and say yes.
Yeah.
But anyway, so things like that, but really, it's all discharge planning. So
Mm.
where are these people going when they get out of here? They're going to go home with their spouse like me and build a ramp and build steps and remodel this and that and everything else. Again, it depends on what they need, depends on their social supports. The therapists kind of tell me what they need. Oh, they're going to need a shower chair, bath bench, cane. Some of it's covered by insurance, some of it's not. So if it's not, I have a couple charitable funds I can dip into, one from the hospital, one through another committee that I'm on it sounds really silly, but it's through Pierce County Crime Stoppers. So that's a
Hmm.
that's a whole nother story. I don't need to tell you that one. I mean, it's fine, but um, so that's just one thing is I got to sit in morning huddles with all the doctors and therapists. Then we have weekly conferences, and these are all mandated for our license as a level one trauma center. So there's a lot of things that are required of us. One of them is they have to have a social worker on the floor. So but yeah, so there, some of those meeting things you have to go to. You get involved in a lot of family meetings, a lot of family drama,
Yeah.
and education. Like people will say, I've never, we've never had to deal with having a stroke before. And I say the same thing. I'm like, well, that's a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
We don't want you to be an expert at this. So,
Yeah.
it's just a lot of education, a lot of crying, a lot of, some of it's just, being there with somebody and, I don't have all the answers and, we can't fix everything. And some people think, we live in the United States of America. We have everything, don't even the veteran. Oh, he's a veteran. Okay, well, that's nice, but it doesn't get them anywhere.
Yeah.
In a lot of cases. And again, every case is different, every
Mm-hmm.
patient's different. Um, and our clientele, I mean, not our clientele, but our patient population ranges from 16 to we had a 103-year-old, we had a 99-year-old last week. So
Wow.
the majority of the patients are probably ages 30 through 70, I would say.
Mm.
A lot of, maybe most populations 50s and 60s. And, a lot of them come in there, they got drug and alcohol problems, you name it, I've seen it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so what I tell everybody, I said, this guy just had a stroke. This, lady had a brain injury, whatever issues they had before this didn't just go away. So not
Right.
not only do they have to deal with all that, they have to deal with this as well, uh,
Yeah.
and their family and everything else. And I can't fix everything for you. I'm sorry, but you do your best counseling, giving them what resources you can. Because the other thing is I can't do everything for them after the fact.
Right.
So a lot of discharge planning, a lot of patients, the majority of our patients do go home, which I think we're at a 87% rate, which is good, really good actually. A lot of them will go to a nursing home, and then some of them will go to an adult family home, which again, you get the state involved in a lot of things. Dealing with insurances back in the day, years ago
Mm-hmm.
when I was a patient, and even 10 years ago, everybody had Medicare and Medicaid. This was
Mm-hmm.
before, before Obamacare, right? So now everyone has a managed Medicare or a managed Medicaid program or both, which means we have to get authorization from the insurance to keep them 3 more days, to keep them a week, all these things. Otherwise, they could get a bill. They most likely won't, but we have to at least let them know that, right? So,
Yeah.
but my case managers, that's the one thing they do that I don't, is they have to do the insurance updates and whatnot. So, they have patients, however many of them have patients, and then I have a certain amount of patients, and I usually get the ones that, are socially have a lot of things going on, whether it be drug and alcohol, domestic violence. I mean, we get folks in there that are sex offenders. I mean, you name it. Like I said,
Yeah.
nothing surprises me, and that's coming from after working at CPS too. So,
Mm-hmm.
people always say, "Oh, I bet you hear all this stuff." And I'm like, "Yeah, pretty much." I mean, every now and then someone surprises me, but nothing shocks me.
Mm-hmm.
But I've had patients, family members assaulting each other in the
Oh my
hallway, you know,
gosh, yeah.
grandkids and people in my office crying, and just I've had to call security multiple times, and people shooting up in the room and smoking pot, and it's just gang member. I mean, you name it. So I get to deal and do with all that and try to educate them and find the best situation for them. What
Mm-hmm.
all the rest of the therapists and team have trouble with is, I'm not comfortable with them discharging. And I'm
Mm.
to this place or that place or whatever. And if they cognitively and they have the capacity to make that decision, they get to. And I had to tell multiple therapists before, it's not about you being comfortable. It's about doing the best we can. And, we can't stop people from making bad decisions.
Mm-hmm.
If we did, we wouldn't have half these patients, right?
Yeah.
People don't stop me from making bad decisions,
Yeah.
saying smart aleck things in conference or huddle. And they're like,
Yeah.
especially the new therapists, they're like, oh my gosh. I'm like, you should hear the things I don't say. I'm like, no,
Yeah.
I've been here too long. So
Uh,
yeah, so just a lot of that. All of our patients are required to do 3 or 4 hours of therapy every day. Which in a nursing home you might get 1 or 2 hours every day. So getting into our programs, it's a pretty big deal, and it's harder to get into now, but easier to get out, kind of, because insurance doesn't want them there very long. The
mm,
insurance won't pay for overnights at home anymore.
right.
So you can't do that. Yeah, so but yeah, they're probably average stay is probably about 2 weeks, but I had a gentleman there about a year and a half, and a lot of our brain injury folks, they lose their frontal lobe, and so they'll say things to staff that they wouldn't say. They'll, try and grab at, female staff and everything else. And if you're not used to working with somebody with a brain injury, uh, you know, I mean, it can be pretty traumatizing for the staff member.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
I had this one gentleman, he was 83 years old, fell backwards, just raking leaves in his yard, hit his head.
Mm.
I couldn't go home, nothing. He was there a year and a half because we had to file for guardianship for him, dealing with a lot of stuff. It was during COVID. I mean, it's, a lot of these cases. And then I got everybody coming to me, John, when's this person going home? John, when's that person going home? Or they'll tell the patients or their family, oh, well, the social worker will help you with that. So I've literally had to send out emails saying, please do not tell families, patients what I'm going to do. You have no idea what I'm going to do. You have no idea
Yeah.
what is on my plate. Just say,
Yeah.
just say, I will take that message and I'll let the people that need to know. And don't bring them to my office. They do that happens a lot. I'm on the phone, I'm in the middle of something. They bring a family member to my office that I know talks,
Mm-hmm.
never be quiet. So, but we have our own dining room there, so patients don't normally eat in their rooms. But yeah, it's pretty rewarding. I mean, you see patients come in that you never thought you'd see walking, and most of them are stroke patients or
Mm-hmm.
brain injury patients. There was one patient that the brain injury did solve their problems because the kid was homeless and shooting heroin, and
Mm.
after his brain injury, no, never did drugs again. And his brain injury wasn't so severe that he couldn't communicate or anything. He wound up they opened a brain injury kind of like group home place in Seattle, and he wound up being the first resident there. And so when his
Mm-hmm.
mom brought him back to see us one day, we were just all in shock. Like, oh my gosh, that is so great. He was on TV, everything.
Oh, good
That's
for
the other
him.
thing. We've had a lot of media uh things
Mm.
there too. And I mean, just I could go on and on. Like I said, it's not what I do, what don't I do? So,
Yeah.
and then I have people that have discharged 2 weeks, 2 years. They'll call me.
Mm.
I'm like, oh my gosh, you still got my number? Because I tell them, I'll call anytime if you need to. And
Yeah.
this one poor guy, he had a stroke and he was living in a shed far away in another 3 counties away. Because we take them from all over. I mean, we've had patients from Mexico, everywhere. Because we're the kind of one of the only places. But this guy, he had a stroke. He wound up going back to where this gentleman lived, and he called me 2 years later. I'm like, you still, and I remembered who he is. Now, mind you, there's probably a patient discharged last week. If you ask me about, I'll be like, I have no clue who you're talking
Yeah.
about. But some
Uh-huh.
people just stick with you. And
Yeah.
he was one of them. And so I said, you still have my number? He was like, yeah, I got your card thumbtacked right next to my bed and on my wall.
Oh,
I said, okay, that's not weird. But then I'll get people that call, years later. I think this one lady called me 2, 3, no, it's more like 4 years later to tell me her brother had passed away. And I'm like,
mm.
oh my gosh, sorry. And she just wanted to tell me that the effect I had on his life and that he really appreciated me, and everything I did. I'm like, oh, thanks. That's good to hear that stuff.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so, as far as my condition, you're right. Everybody I talked to when I was a patient said, it'll get better, it'll get better. No one told me it will get worse before it gets better. And so
Mm-hmm.
I tell them all the time that same thing. I said, it's going to get worse. And I'm like, you got to go through it to get through it. So,
Yeah.
it's going to be tough, harder than you think. But
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of just the way it is. And there was one young lady, she was probably 23, 24, got in a horrible car wreck, and it's pretty much the
Mm.
same condition I am in, but she was just, she had been in and out of jail, doing a lot of pain meds and, just all kinds of stuff. She was headed down a dark road, and
Yeah.
she was just, you know, rough around the edges, like big time, like
Mm.
cussing at nurses, everything, you name it. She never cussed at me. We cried a lot, had a lot of conversations. She sent me a message 4 weeks ago, I miss you. I'm so grateful. She has turned her life around. She's doing amazing. And
Wow.
she'll tell me every now and then. I still remember that first day I met you. You came in with that big smile. I'll never forget it. But there were times where she wouldn't talk to me either. And in there, she wasn't gonna have it. She was pissed, right?
Yeah.
That this had happened to her. So um
Mm-hmm.
anyway, yeah, so that's kind of the gist of it. Now,
Yeah.
if you ask my coworkers, they'll tell you all the things I really do, I guess, or more of what I do. Like Jessie, who can tell you a lot, but even she's only there not part-time. She doesn't know everything I do either. But yeah,
Well, from what Jesse has said, it does sound like that. I know you mentioned that you're the same person you were from before the accident. It sounds like among many things, your work ethic that was instilled to you by your stepdad is
yeah.
still very much alive and well in your work. And I'm wondering, are you planning on retiring? How, like, do you have a retirement plan? Not that
I
I think
mean,
that you're like retirement age, but
are you calling me old?
I'm not, I promise I'm not calling you old.
No.
I feel like you just keep doing, you keep
No.
achieving. And some people are like, I'm gonna work until I can't. Some people are like, oh yeah, once I'm 65, I'm out. You won't
Yeah,
see me
no,
anymore.
I think I'll have to work to at least 67, but
Hmm.
I'm like I'll probably be one of those guys that dies the day after he retires.
Oh,
Just, you hear that a lot, right?
you do.
But
Yeah.
no, hopefully I will. I mean, someday, obviously. I do have a plan for that. But yeah, I'm still up at 4:30 every day, whether I sleep or not. And I get home, I get to work about 6:37 every morning, leave about anywhere from 4 to 7. Um,
Oh, long days.
I'm on salary, so they owe me a lot of money, but I'll never see it. But yeah, but I do that too. So if like my caregivers are late, I'll still beat all my coworkers there. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, yeah, what else was I gonna take? Oh yeah, so all of my kids, they have all moved out. And
Hmm.
like I said, most of them, the only one that doesn't have a kid or have one on the way is Tink, my oldest. And I always say she has two cats and her boyfriend. But I always say that's because she's the smartest. And my oldest son hasn't had any. He's got one on the way. So I always say
Oh.
they're the two oldest, so they've seen the most. So, but
Hmm.
but my youngest daughter, she moved out the day she turned 18. They've all bought homes already, and they're all very much more successful than I ever was. I didn't buy a home till late in life, but you know how when you're a kid, a lot of times you'll hear, "You think this is hard? Wait till you get out on your own." You think they see how hard it is then. Well, my kids, I said, if living out on your own is easier than living with dad, you're welcome.
Yeah.
That
Yeah,
means
you're
that,
welcome.
that means I did my job. If the
Yeah.
outside world is a piece of cake.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
great. Do they
Anyway,
all live locally or do you
yeah,
get to see your grandbabies much?
yep, they're all in the same area.
How nice. I love that.
Yeah, so there you go. Any questions? I mean, it looks like I took up plenty of your time today.
Yeah, we've been having a good long couple of chats. It's awesome. I think the only thing that I wanted to ask you additionally was, well, actually, no, there's two questions. One is what motivates you to do your job? Like you work really hard, you work really long hours as you just described. What is the reason that at 4:30 every day you're ready to show up and do what you do?
Well, I don't enjoy it as much as I used to. And I think again, I'm just, you get older and the work gets harder and longer and
Yeah.
the resources and things get less and less. And, I'm just getting old and cranky. But no, I learn something all the time. I never know what the day is going to be like. You can think something's going to happen one way and your whole day can get thrown off by, one anything. So
Mm-hmm.
I like which is very interesting because I don't do anything without a plan. I am not spontaneous at all. But at work, you have no choice to. And the other thing is because I can't write, and the only thing I write down is phone numbers and addresses. Like when I'm interviewing a patient or meeting with them, I'll just have a normal conversation with them. It's all about building that rapport. Sometimes I won't even bring up, you know, drugs or alcohol or whatever else they have in their chart until I
Yeah.
get to know them a little bit, things like that.
Yeah.
I like it. I like my coworkers and everybody I work with. So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it's and again, like I said, you never know how you're gonna affect somebody's life. I'm sure
Right.
I'm sure good and bad, right? I don't know.
Yeah. I guess all we can do is the next right thing and hope that our actions are ones that we can live with and that are hopefully helpful for other
Yeah.
people.
Yeah. I can tell you another thing is,
Oh yeah.
uh, a lot of staff, doctors, therapists, nurses, whatever, they lose sleep at night over patients and things.
Hmm.
I never lose, well, I don't sleep at all, but it's not because of them. I
Yeah.
never, I never take that home with me. I didn't do it when I worked for CPS. I'm like, you just gotta do what you gotta do, and you're not gonna save the world. You can just,
Yeah.
I'm like, if you're a social worker that is like that, that takes everything to heart and can't stop thinking and worries about it. I mean, like I said, I'm a worrywart by nature, but for some reason I don't take it home with me.
Yeah. I feel like I guess I would wonder about how, because you have had an experience in your life where you've realized that like we can't control the outcome. We can only
Mhm.
like you experience true powerlessness
Yeah.
um in a way that I think a lot of our listeners will relate to, where it's like I could get all emotionally hung up on what's happening and let it be the thing that's keeping me up at night, but all I can do is what I can do. And
Yep.
I feel like I noticed that with people when they've gone through situations where it's like, I know what it's like to be completely powerless, so I'm not going to worry about the outcome because
Yeah.
I
Nope.
can't, I have no control over the outcome.
Yeah. Nope. You're right.
Hmm.
So,
Hmm. Um, the other question that I have for you, I guess it's a little bit existential, I guess, but as a social worker, as somebody who has worked in the system for your
mhm.
career, if you had a magic wand that you could wave and change one thing, what would it be?
Well, the easy answer is that everybody would have what they need, right?
Yeah.
If there was an unlimited amount of resources, um, that people had access to, it would make
Hmm.
things so much easier, right?
Yeah.
I mean, everyone that leaves the rehab unit is going to have some effect on them the rest of their life. They're
Yeah.
not just coming in the hospital, getting better and going home. They're
Hmm.
going home with, you know, whatever disability they have. A lot of them do get better, a little better, some a lot. It just depends, but the resources, there's just not a lot of caregivers or accessible homes for people to go to. And if
Yeah.
there are, the hoops you got to jump through are too many hoops.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. And
I
like you
mean,
said, the people coming in with let's just say like alcohol addiction, drug addiction,
mm,
untreated mental illness, homelessness, all those things, like they just added a layer of trauma onto that. That's still waiting for them to address it in some way, shape, or form.
yeah.
It sounds like
But
you really help them get connected with those resources, but that's still there.
it's kind of like we've said over the years, me, my coworkers, everybody, it's like I'm a marriage and family therapy counselor, I'm a drug and alcohol counselor, I'm a mental health expert, I'm a real estate agent, you name it. I,
Yeah,
I'm all
you
these,
got,
I wear all these hats.
yeah, yeah. Um, well, is there anything else you want to add, John? I think that we can maybe
Oh,
wind down this episode.
yeah, no, I think, well, I'm not going to say I think I said it all because I know I didn't, but I think, yeah. uh,
Well, just this has been a great conversation for our listeners. John and I have chatted for 6 hours on our Saturday, and it's been great. It's been so nice
oh
getting
my
to know you,
goodness.
John. And just this has been just so educational for me, and I hope our listeners leave a little bit smarter and more aware and more compassionate. Listeners, I also just want to thank you for tuning in and learning about John, his experiences. As I say at the end of every episode, if you don't follow us on Spotify or Instagram, we're Uniquely Qualified on Spotify, Uniquely Qualified Pod on Instagram. And if you know somebody who you think would benefit from hearing John's story, please share it with them. And if you're hearing this and you've overcome a challenge and John has inspired you to share, you can direct message me on Instagram or you can email me, which the email address is uniquelyqualifiedpodcast@gmail.com. I hope that you leave here feeling just a little bit better, more connected, and healed. And please remember that no matter what, we are all uniquely qualified.